The billionaire was about to sign a deal. Black Waitress whispered one warning and everything changed. What if one whispered warning could unravel a billion-dollar empire in 60 seconds? Richard Ashford didn't believe in warnings. At 63, he'd built Ashford Technologies from a garage startup into a fortune that could buy small countries. He'd learned to trust numbers, contracts, and his own ruthless instinct. But that Tuesday morning in a quiet Atlanta restaurant, with his pen hovering over the contract that would secure his legacy, a young woman named Sienna leaned close to his table. She was 28, a waitress with warm brown eyes that carried something urgent and afraid. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she refilled his coffee. "Mr. Ashford, please don't sign that paper. I know it's not my place, but you need to know what they're planning." Richard's hand froze. The boardroom fell silent. His lawyers exchanged confused glances. And in that moment, everything he thought he knew began to crumble. "Where are you watching from today?" Richard Ashford had woken up that morning believing it was the best day of his life. The merger with Titan Industries had been 18 months in the making. Countless meetings, negotiations that stretched into dawn, lawyers dissecting every clause until the words blurred together. His company would triple in value overnight. His name would be carved permanently into the business history books. He'd already imagined the Forbes article, the interviews, the vindication after years of people calling him too aggressive, too driven, too cold. The restaurant choice had been deliberate. Magnolia Table was elegant but understated, a place where Atlanta's elite conducted business over buttermilk biscuits and perfectly scrambled eggs. Richard liked the dark wood paneling, the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, the way sunlight filtered through lace curtains onto white tablecloths. It felt like old money and new possibilities mixed together. Marcus Chen, Titan's CEO, sat across from him looking equally pleased. They'd developed an odd friendship through the negotiations. Two men who understood that business was a chess game played with billion-dollar pieces. Marcus had brought his senior counsel, a sharp woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves who'd earned her reputation dismantling corporate fraud cases before switching sides to make real money. Richard had his own team flanking him, James, his CFO of 20 years, and two lawyers whose hourly rates could fund a small hospital. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, spreading the final contract across the table like a treasure map, "I believe this is where we make history." Richard smiled, reached for his fountain pen, the same one he'd used to sign his first major deal 32 years ago, and that's when Sienna appeared beside him. He'd barely noticed her before, just another pleasant face refilling water glasses and ensuring the business elite had everything they needed. She was young, wearing the restaurant's standard uniform of a white blouse and black slacks, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that somehow made her look both professional and vulnerable. She'd been circling their table all morning with a coffee pot, her hands steady even though Richard noticed she kept glancing at the contract spread between them. He'd assumed she was curious. Most people were fascinated by the proximity to real power and money. But when she leaned down to refill his cup, her voice came out tight and scared. "Mr. Ashford, please don't sign that paper. I know it's not my place, but you need to know what they're planning." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Richard stared at her, his pen still suspended above the signature line. Marcus's smile faltered. Dr. Reeves straightened in her chair, her expression shifting from relaxed to alert in half a second. "Excuse me." Richard's voice carried the edge that made junior executives tremble during quarterly reviews. Sienna's hand shook slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't, I could lose my job for this, but I heard them talking yesterday. They came in for dinner, Mr. Chen's legal team, and I was serving their table." Her eyes flicked to Dr. Reeves, then back to Richard. They were celebrating, saying how the old man would never see it coming. How the intellectual property clause was buried so deep you'd need a microscope to find it. How by the time you realized what you'd signed away, Titan would own everything that matters. The boardroom seemed to contract. Marcus Chen's face had gone carefully blank, which Richard had learned meant he was either furious or calculating his next move. Dr. Reeves opened her mouth to speak, but Richard raised his hand, his attention entirely focused on this young woman who'd just crashed a billion-dollar deal with nothing but a whispered warning and terrified honesty in her eyes. "That's an extremely serious accusation," Dr. Reeves said, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "Young lady, do you realize you could be sued for slander? Interfering with a legitimate business transaction." Sienna's face paled, but she didn't back down. "I know what I heard. I've been working here for 3 years, and I've learned when to keep my mouth shut. But this felt wrong. Really wrong." Richard set down his pen with deliberate care. His instinct screamed at him to dismiss this interruption. Some confused waitress who'd misunderstood corporate jargon overheard during her shift. But something in her eyes reminded him of his younger self, when he'd been a nobody trying to warn his first boss about accounting irregularities that everyone else had chosen to ignore. He'd been right then. It had cost him that job but saved him from going down with a company that collapsed 6 months later. "James," Richard said quietly to his CFO, "pull out section 14 through 18. Read every word." "Richard, this is absurd," Marcus started, but Richard cut him off with a look that had silenced boardrooms across 3 continents. "Humor me." The next 20 minutes felt like swimming through cold water. James read, his finger tracing lines of legal text that Richard had admittedly only skimmed after his lawyers assured him everything was standard. Dr. Reeves maintained her pleasant smile, but Richard noticed her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus ordered another coffee he didn't drink. Sienna had retreated to a corner, still visible, gripping a water pitcher like a lifeline. The restaurant manager had appeared, hovering nervously, clearly torn between throwing out an employee who disrupted an important client's meeting and the curiosity about what was actually happening. "Here," James said suddenly, his voice strange. "Subsection 17.4.b. It's worded carefully, but if I'm reading this right." He looked up at Richard, and there was something close to horror in his eyes. "Richard, this clause means that any technology developed using Ashford resources within 5 years before the merger automatically becomes Titan property. Not joint ownership. Theirs. Completely." Richard felt his chest constrict. "That's everything. The AI systems we've been developing, the quantum computing patents that aren't public yet, he stopped, staring at Marcus. "That's the entire future of my company. You'd own it all while I'd be left with the shell." Marcus spread his hands in a gesture that might have been apologetic if his eyes hadn't remained cold and calculating. "Richard, you're overreacting. It's standard protection language. If you'd prefer, we can have our teams revisit." "Your team was celebrating this clause specifically," Richard interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. According to Sienna, they knew exactly what they were doing. The moment stretched taut between them. Then Richard did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood, walked over to Sienna, and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "You probably just saved my company." Her handshake was tentative but firm. "I couldn't let it happen, Mr. Ashford. My father always said that silence makes you complicit. If this moment touched your heart and reminded you why honesty still matters in this world, please give this video a thumbs up." Richard turned back to the table where Marcus and his team sat frozen. "Gentlemen, I believe we're done here." He gathered his papers with steady hands, even though rage and gratitude warred inside his chest. "James, call the lawyers. All of them. I want to know how this got past everyone." The fallout hit like a hurricane. By that afternoon, Richard's legal team had filled his office. 12 lawyers arguing, pointing at documents, some defensive about missing the clause, others focused on damage control. The conference table looked like a paper explosion, contracts and addendums scattered everywhere, while people Richard had trusted for years suddenly seemed like strangers who'd almost led him off a cliff. "How did none of you catch this?" Richard's voice was rough from hours of talking. "I pay you collectively more than most people see in a lifetime, and a 28-year-old waitress spotted what you all missed." His lead counsel, a man named Herbert who'd been with Richard since the early days, looked genuinely shaken. Richard, we were focused on the financial terms. The acquisition price, the stock options, the employee retention clauses. This intellectual property section seemed like standard boilerplate. It's written in such technical language that... That's exactly why they buried it there, Richard interrupted. He sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 63 years. They knew what we'd focus on. They knew our blind spots. James appeared in the doorway, his phone still pressed to his ear. Richard, we have a bigger problem. Marcus is threatening to sue for breach of contract. He's claiming we had a verbal agreement, and that walking away constitutes. Let him try. Richard's laugh was bitter. I'd love to see him explain in court why his legal team was celebrating their trap before I'd even signed. But the real weight came later that evening, after everyone had left and Richard sat alone in his office watching Atlanta's lights sparkle through floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd almost lost everything. Not through bad business or market changes or technology shifts he should have anticipated, but through his own arrogance. He'd been so confident in his judgment, so certain that his team had everything handled, that he'd stopped paying attention to the details that mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Claire, who worked in his marketing department. Dad, are you okay? Rumors are flying. He stared at the message, thinking about how close he'd come to signing away not just his legacy, but hers. The company was supposed to be something she'd inherit, shape, make her own. Instead, he'd nearly handed it to sharks who'd have stripped it for parts. Richard pulled up the restaurant's website and found a phone number. The manager answered on the third ring, sounding nervous. Mr. Ashford, if this is about earlier, I want to assure you that Sienna has been disciplined. Don't you dare fire her, Richard said sharply. Or discipline her. Or do anything except maybe promote her. Is she there? She's finishing her shift, yes, but put her on. A pause, then Sienna's voice came through, wary and quiet. Mr. Ashford, I need to understand something, Richard said, and he was surprised to hear his voice crack slightly. You risked your job, possible legal action, everything, for someone you don't know. Why? The silence stretched so long he thought the connection had dropped. Then Sienna spoke, and her words carried a weight that made Richard's throat tight. My father worked for a tech company for 30 years. He was loyal, dedicated, believed in what they were building. Then new ownership came in with contracts nobody fully read. Within 2 years, they'd stripped the patents, fired everyone over 50, and walked away rich while people like my dad lost their pensions. He died 3 years ago still fighting that lawsuit. Richard closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I saw Mr. Chen's team celebrating, and I heard enough to know what they were planning. I couldn't just watch it happen again. Her voice steadied. Maybe I was stupid to interfere. But I had to try. Have you or someone you love ever faced something like this, where speaking up felt impossible but staying silent felt worse? Share your story in the comments below. You weren't stupid, Richard said quietly. You were brave. And tomorrow, I want you to come to my office. I think we need to talk about your future. Sienna appeared at Ashford Technologies the next morning looking completely out of place among the glass and chrome and people in designer suits who moved with the confident urgency of those who knew their time was valuable. Security had her name on a list, which seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised the receptionist who processed her visitor badge. Richard met her in his office, a space designed to intimidate with its expansive view, modernist art that cost more than most houses, and furniture that whispered power in every clean line. But he'd asked his assistant to bring coffee and the good pastries from the bakery down the street, trying to make the space feel less like an interrogation room. You didn't have to do this, Sienna said, perched nervously on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost what she made in 2 months. Yes, I did. Richard slid a folder across his desk. I had my team do some research. You graduated top of your class from Georgia State with a degree in business ethics and a minor in corporate law. You've been working at Magnolia Table while applying to law schools, getting rejected because you can't afford the LSAT prep courses that give other candidates an edge. Sienna's eyes widened. How did you? I'm a billionaire, Sienna. I can find out most things when I'm motivated. He smiled slightly. But what I can't find out is why someone with your credentials and obvious intelligence is wasting your potential serving coffee to people who don't deserve you. She looked down at her hands. Bills don't pay themselves, Mr. Ashford. My mom's medical expenses from when she had cancer cleaned out everything we'd saved. I work, I study when I can, and I hope someday things might be different. Richard felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of the distance between their worlds and the accident of birth and circumstance that had placed them on opposite sides of it. I want to offer you something. My company has a legal department, but what we apparently don't have is someone focused on ethical oversight. Someone who can look at contracts and deals and tell me when we're about to do something stupid or wrong. Mr. Ashford, I'm creating a new position. Director of Corporate Ethics and Compliance. You'd have a team, full access to all major decisions before they're finalized, and the authority to raise red flags without fear of retaliation. You'd also have a salary that would let you attend law school at night if you wanted, on the company's dime. Sienna stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. You're offering me a job because I interrupted your meeting?
Don't drink the coffee.
I'm offering you a job because you demonstrated better judgment in 30 seconds than my entire legal team showed in 18 months. Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. And because yesterday you showed me something I'd forgotten. That doing the right thing matters more than playing it safe. That integrity isn't negotiable. That sometimes the most important voice in the room belongs to the person everyone else is ignoring. Tears welled in Sienna's eyes, and she didn't try to hide them. My father would have loved knowing this happened. He always said good people still existed in business, even when I got cynical. Your father was right. Richard extended his hand across the desk. So what do you say? Want to help make sure a billionaire doesn't do anything else stupid? Her laugh was watery but genuine as she shook his hand. I'd be honored, Mr. Ashford. If you've been enjoying this story and want to see more tales about integrity, second chances, and people who dare to do the right thing, please subscribe to our channel. The merger with Titan Industries died quietly in the following weeks, buried under legal threats from both sides until everyone agreed it was better to walk away. Marcus Chen sent a brief email that didn't apologize but acknowledged differing visions for corporate partnership. Richard deleted it without responding. 3 months later, Richard stood in the newly renovated office suite that housed his company's ethics and compliance division. Sienna had transformed a dusty storage area into a bright space with windows overlooking the city and walls covered with mission statements about transparency and integrity. She'd hired 2 assistants, both young people from backgrounds similar to hers who brought hungry intelligence and genuine care to work that most corporate lawyers considered boring. Mr. Ashford, Sienna called from her desk, where she was reviewing a potential partnership agreement with a European tech firm. Can you look at Section 9? Something feels off about their data privacy language. Richard smiled, walking over to peer at the contract she'd already covered with highlighted passages and handwritten notes. That's why you're here. What's your gut telling you? That they're promising protections in the press release that aren't actually in the contract. She tapped her pen against the page. Which means either they're sloppy or they're hoping we won't notice. So what's your recommendation? Send it back. Ask for clarification. And if they get defensive instead of grateful, we walk away. She looked up at him, more confident now than that scared young woman who'd whispered her warning across a restaurant table. We don't need partners who play games with words. Agreed. Richard initialed her notes, officially endorsing her assessment. You know, James told me yesterday that you've flagged 12 potential issues in the past 90 days. 8 of them would have cost us money. 3 would have cost us reputation. 1 might have landed us in regulatory trouble. Sienna flushed slightly. I'm just doing my job. You're doing it extraordinarily well. Richard paused, then spoke more quietly. I wanted to tell you something. I've been in business for almost 40 years. I've made billions of dollars, built technology that changed industries, and had my face on more magazine covers than I can count. But the decision I'm most proud of is the one I didn't make, the one you stopped me from making. Her eyes glistened. Mr. Ashford, let me finish. He smiled gently. I've also decided to establish a scholarship fund in your father's name, for students who show promise in business ethics but face financial barriers to education. Because he raised a daughter brave enough to risk everything for a stranger's benefit, and that deserves to be honored. Sienna covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling over despite her efforts to contain them. He would have been so proud. Thank you doesn't feel like enough. Then just keep being who you are. Keep speaking up when something's wrong. Keep reminding all of us that success without integrity is just expensive failure. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture paternal and warm. You saved more than my company that day, Sienna. You reminded me why I started building it in the first place. Later that evening, Richard sat in his home office, smaller and more comfortable than the one downtown, filled with family photos and memories instead of status symbols. He pulled out the contract he'd never signed, the one that would have destroyed everything he'd built. He'd kept it as a reminder. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. Dinner Sunday? I want to hear more about this scholarship program. Sounds like something we should expand. Richard smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Sometimes the most important deals weren't the ones you signed. Sometimes they were the ones you walked away from because someone cared enough to warn you. And sometimes, if you were lucky and humble enough to listen, the youngest voice in the room carried the most wisdom. He'd almost learned that lesson too late. But thanks to a brave young woman who refused to stay silent, he'd learned it just in time. If you enjoyed this story about integrity, second chances, and the courage to speak truth to power, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about times you've had to make difficult choices, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer someone isn't money or power, but simply the truth at exactly the right moment.